An hour later, Zarathi sat across from the human in her private office, studying the being that had single-handedly solved what should have been an impossible situation. The human had cleaned up and was now wearing a spare station uniform that was slightly too large for its frame. Despite the ill-fitting clothes, it maintained that same calm, alert posture that had marked its behavior throughout the crisis. "I realize I don't even know your name," Zarathi began, activating her recording device. "This conversation will need to go into my official report." "Marcus Chen," the human replied. "Engineer 3rd Class Earth Colonial Survey Ship Endeavor, at least that was my last official assignment." "What happened to your ship?" Marcus leaned back slightly, his expression becoming distant. "We were exploring a system about 3 weeks out from here when we encountered what your people would probably call a spatial anomaly, some kind of gravitic distortion that we couldn't detect until we were right on top of it. The ship was torn apart in seconds." Zarathi made notes on her tablet, but found herself more interested in studying Marcus's body language than recording his words. Even discussing what must have been a traumatic experience, he remained composed and controlled. Most species would show some emotional reaction when recounting the destruction of their ship and the likely death of their crewmates. "How many survived?" she asked. "Just me, as far as I know. I managed to get to an escape pod, but the others." Marcus shrugged slightly. "The pods were only designed for short-term survival. I was lucky your people found me when you did." "Marcus," Zarathi said carefully, "I need to ask about what happened in the processing center. Your combat abilities seem quite advanced for a maintenance engineer." For the first time since she had met him, Marcus showed something approaching amusement. "You want to know why I can fight?" "I want to understand what I just witnessed. Those were trained Valderan warriors, and you defeated them without weapons, without armor, without even appearing to exert significant effort." Marcus was quiet for a moment, considering his response. "Commander, how much do you know about human history?" "Nothing," Zarathi admitted. "Your species doesn't appear in any of our databases." "That's because we're new to space travel, very new. The Endeavor was actually part of humanity's first real attempt at interstellar exploration." Marcus paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "Our planet. Our species has a complicated relationship with violence." "What do you mean?" "We evolved as persistence hunters on a world that was trying to kill us every day. For most of our history, everything was dangerous. The animals, the environment, each other. We learned to fight because we had to, and we got very good at it because the ones who weren't good at it didn't survive to pass on their genes." Zarathi felt a chill run down her spine. "Your entire species evolved for combat?" "Not exactly," Marcus said. "We evolved for survival, which often meant combat. But we also evolved for cooperation, for problem-solving, for adapting to new situations. The thing is, we never really stopped being what we were. Even now, even after we've developed space travel and advanced technology, every human carries the genetic memory of 100,000 years of fighting to survive." "But you said you were a maintenance engineer." Marcus smiled. "I am. But on Earth, every human learns at least basic combat skills. It's considered as fundamental as learning to read or do mathematics. You never know when you might need to defend yourself or others." Zarathi tried to process this information. "So every member of your species can fight like you did today?" "No," Marcus said, and she felt a momentary relief. "Most humans are much better at it than I am." The relief vanished instantly, replaced by something approaching terror. "Better? I was never military," Marcus explained matter-of-factly. "I learned basic self-defense and some hand-to-hand combat techniques, but that's all. A real soldier, or someone trained in one of our martial arts disciplines, would have ended that fight in half the time." Zarathi's mind raced through the implications. If Marcus was considered barely trained by human standards, what would an actual human warrior be capable of? The Valdorans were among the most feared fighters in the galaxy, and Marcus had dispatched them like they were children. "How many humans are there?" she asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. "About 8 billion on Earth last count. Maybe another million spread across our colonial settlements and survey missions. 8 billion. Zarathy felt dizzy. If humans ever decided to expand aggressively into galactic space, there might not be any force capable of stopping them. The implications for galactic peace and stability were staggering. Marcus, she said slowly, why haven't your people made contact with galactic civilization before now? We didn't know anyone else was out here, he replied simply. Our technology is still pretty limited compared to what I've seen on your station. We can travel between stars, but it takes months or years to go anywhere significant. We assumed that if there were other intelligent species, they were probably too far away to encounter. And now that you know we exist? Marcus considered the question. That's not really my decision to make, I'm just an engineer. But if I had to guess, I'd say humanity would be very interested in peaceful contact. We've been alone for so long that the idea of meeting other intelligent species is pretty exciting. Zarathy wasn't sure if that was reassuring or terrifying. What about your government, your military? We don't have a single government, Marcus said. Earth is divided into hundreds of different nations, each with their own policies and military forces. Some are more aggressive than others, but most would probably prefer trade and cooperation to conflict. The political complexity added another layer to Zarathy's concerns. Dealing with a single human government would be challenging enough. Dealing with hundreds of potentially different human factions, all with the combat capabilities Marcus had demonstrated, could be a nightmare. Marcus, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Of course, do humans pose a threat to galactic peace? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. When he looked up, his expression was serious. Commander, humans have been fighting wars among themselves for our entire recorded history. We've developed weapons that could destroy our entire planet, and we've come close to using them more than once. We're capable of incredible violence when we feel threatened or when our survival is at stake. Zarathy felt her worst fears being confirmed. But, Marcus continued, we're also capable of incredible compassion. We've spent centuries trying to overcome our violent nature, trying to build societies based on cooperation instead of conquest. Most humans today live peaceful lives, focused on building rather than destroying. What would make humans feel threatened? Being attacked? Having our families or homes endangered? Being treated as inferior or enslaved? Marcus met her gaze directly. Being seen as a threat to be eliminated rather than as potential friends to be welcomed. The message was clear, and Zarathy understood the warning behind the calm words. How humanity was treated during first contact would largely determine whether they became allies or enemies of galactic civilization. What happened next defied everything Zarathy thought she knew about physics, biology, and common sense. The human moved. It wasn't the movement of someone trying to escape or hide. It wasn't the desperate flailing of a cornered victim. It was something else entirely. Something that made Zarathy's analytical mind struggle to process what she was seeing. The human's body seemed to explode into motion, covering the distance to the nearest pirate faster than should have been possible for a being without mechanical enhancement. The Valderan tried to bring his weapon around, but the human was already inside his guard, moving with a fluid precision that spoke of countless hours of training. The human's hand struck the pirate's wrist with surgical accuracy, and the sound of breaking bone echoed through the chamber. The energy rifle clattered to the floor as the warrior cried out in pain. Before he could recover, the human's other hand had found his throat, fingers pressing against specific points that made the massive Valderan collapse like a puppet with cut strings. The entire exchange took less than 3 seconds. Zarathy found herself frozen in place, unable to process what she had just witnessed. The human had moved like nothing she had ever seen, with a combination of speed, precision, and controlled violence that seemed impossible for such a small creature. The other pirates were equally stunned. For a moment, the chamber was completely silent except for the unconscious Valderan's labored breathing. Then chaos erupted. Torvak roared in rage and brought his own weapon to bear, but the human was already moving again. Instead of trying to dodge the energy blast, it did something that made Zarathy question her own eyesight. The human seemed to anticipate exactly where the shot would go, and moved just enough to let it pass harmlessly by. The human reached Torvak before the pirate captain could fire again. What followed was not a fight in any traditional sense. It was a demonstration of how utterly outclassed the Valdorans were, despite their size and strength advantage. The humans' movements were economical and precise. Every strike served a purpose. Every dodge was calculated to position for the next attack. Torvak swung his massive fists with enough force to shatter stone, but they hit nothing but air. The humans seemed to flow around the attacks like water, always exactly where the pirate least expected. A knee strike to Torvak's solar plexus doubled him over. An elbow to the back of his neck sent him to his knees. A precise strike to his wrist made him drop his weapon. Throughout it all, the human maintained that same calm expression, as if it were performing a routine maintenance task rather than dismantling one of the galaxy's most feared warrior races. The remaining pirates opened fire with their energy weapons, but the human was no longer where their shots were aimed. It moved between them like a ghost, using Torvak's body as cover while systematically disabling each threat. Zarathi watched in fascination as the human demonstrated combat techniques she had never imagined. It used the pirates' own momentum against them, turning their strength into a weakness. When one Valdoran charged with a blade weapon, the human sidestepped and guided the warrior's own force into a wall with bone-crushing impact. Another pirate tried to grab the human from behind, confident that his superior size would end the fight quickly. Instead, the human dropped low, grabbed the Valdoran's arm, and used a leverage technique that sent the massive warrior flying through the air to crash into a bank of computer terminals. The entire fight lasted less than 2 minutes. When it was over, 6 Valdoran pirates lay unconscious or groaning on the floor, while the human stood in the center of the chamber, not even breathing hard. The other hostages stared in shock, unable to comprehend what they had just witnessed. The human walked over to where Torvak was slowly trying to get back to his knees and crouched down beside him. When it spoke, its voice was still calm and conversational. "I told you I don't like bullies," the human said. "You should have listened." Torvak looked up at the human with a mixture of pain and confusion. What are you?" The human considered the question for a moment. "I'm a maintenance engineer, actually. 3rd class. I fix things that are broken." It gestured around at the unconscious pirates. This seemed broken. Zarathi finally found her voice and activated the communication system. "Security teams, move in. The situation is resolved." As her security forces entered the chamber, weapons drawn and ready for a firefight, they stopped in amazement at the scene before them. 6 of the galaxy's most dangerous warriors had been defeated by a single being that looked like it could barely lift half their weight. Chief Vectar approached cautiously, his weapon still raised. "Commander, what happened here?" Zarathi realized she didn't know how to answer that question. What had happened defied rational explanation. She looked at the human who was now helping the other hostages to their feet with gentle care, making sure they weren't injured. "The human resolved the situation," she said finally. The human looked up at her through the window and gave a slight nod of acknowledgement. There was no pride in its expression, no satisfaction at having defeated superior numbers. It simply looked like someone who had completed a necessary task and was ready to move on to the next item on its agenda. "Are you injured?" Zarathi asked through the communication system. The human checked itself over quickly and shook its head. "No, I'm fine. Thank you for asking." As the security team began restraining the pirates and checking on the other hostages, Zarathi found herself studying the human more closely. Now that the immediate danger was over, she could see details she had missed before. The human's clothing was indeed salvaged, but it was worn with a practical efficiency that spoke of someone accustomed to making do with limited resources. More importantly, she could see the way the human moved when it thought no one was watching. Every gesture was controlled and purposeful. This was not someone who had gotten lucky in a fight. This was someone who had been trained to be a weapon, despite its claims of being a maintenance engineer. "Human," she called out, "I would like to speak with you privately when the situation here is fully secured." The human looked up at her again and nodded. "Of course, Commander. I understand you probably have questions." Question, Zarathi thought, was putting it mildly. She had just witnessed a complete reversal of everything she thought she knew about combat, physics, and the relative capabilities of different species. The human had moved like it was operating under different laws of physics entirely. as she watched the human helping to tend to the other hostages. Speaking to them in calm, reassuring tones, she realized that her first contact with this new species was going to require a complete reevaluation of galactic threat assessments. Zarathi activated the communication system, her voice echoing through the processing center's speakers. "This is Commander Zarathi of Mining Station Kepler 7. I wish to speak with your leader." The Valdoran pirates immediately went on alert, raising their weapons and scanning the area. The largest one, who appeared to be their captain, gestured for his crew to maintain their positions while he approached the communication panel. "I am Captain Torvak of the Crimson Fang. Your station is now under our control, Commander. You will transfer all processed minerals to our ship and we will leave peacefully." Zarathi kept her voice steady and professional. "Captain Torvak, I'm prepared to discuss terms. However, I need assurance that the hostages will not be harmed during negotiations." The Valdoran captain laughed, a harsh sound that echoed through the chamber. "You are in no position to make demands, Catherian. Your security forces are weak, and your weapons are toys compared to ours. You will comply, or we will start killing hostages to demonstrate our seriousness." Through the window, Zarathi watched as Torvak gestured toward the group of kneeling workers. Most of them flinched at his movement, but the human remained motionless. She noticed that the human's head was now tilted slightly, as if it was listening to something she couldn't hear. "I understand your position, Captain," Zarathi replied. "However, I must inform you that one of your hostages is a diplomatic representative from an unknown species. Harming it could bring unwanted attention from galactic authorities." This was a stretch of the truth, but she hoped it might provide some protection for the mysterious human. Torvak paused, looking down at the hostages with new interest. "Which one?" he demanded. The human looked up at that moment, meeting the pirate captain's gaze directly. Zarathi was amazed to see the human actually smile slightly, as if amused by something. The expression seemed to unnerve Torvak, who took a step back despite his massive size advantage. "That one," Zarathi said. "The human. Its people are new to galactic society, and any incident could complicate future relations." Torvak studied the human more closely. "It doesn't look like much. What kind of warrior race produces such small, weak-looking specimens?" The human spoke for the first time, its voice carrying clearly through the chamber. "We're not warriors exactly. We're just persistent." The words were spoken in perfect galactic standard with just a slight accent that Zarathi couldn't place. What struck her most was the complete absence of fear in the human's voice. It spoke as casually as if it were discussing the weather. Torvak was clearly unsettled by the human's demeanor. In his experience, smaller species either cowered in terror or tried to appear more threatening than they actually were. The human was doing neither. It simply sat there, relaxed and alert, watching everything with those steady eyes. "Persistent at what?" Torvak asked, despite himself. "Surviving," the human replied simply. One of the other pirates approached Torvak and whispered something in his ear. The captain nodded and turned back toward the communication panel. "Commander, we've accessed your station's records. The vault contains enough processed tritanium and rare earth elements to keep us supplied for months. We're taking everything, and there's nothing you can do to stop us." Zarathi felt a chill run down her spine. The pirates were right. Her security team was no match for trained Valdoran warriors, and any direct assault would likely result in multiple casualties. She was trained to think logically, to find rational solutions to problems, but this situation seemed to have no good options. "Captain," she said, "I'm willing to discuss a compromise. Perhaps we could arrange for a partial transfer of materials in exchange for the hostages." "No compromise," Torvak replied firmly. "Full transfer or we start executing prisoners. You have 10 minutes to begin the transfer process." The communication went dead, leaving Zarathi staring through the window at the scene inside. Her mind raced through possible solutions, but each one seemed to lead to disaster. A direct assault would get people killed. Waiting for reinforcements would take too long. Complying with the pirates' demands would leave the station defenseless and bankrupt. As she watched, one of the pirates moved toward the human, apparently intending to use it as an example to motivate faster compliance. The warrior was nearly 3 times the human's size, armed with both energy weapons and traditional Valdoran blade weapons. By all logic, the human should have been terrified. Instead, the human stood up smoothly without being ordered to do so. The movement was so fluid and controlled that it caught everyone's attention. Even from her position outside the chamber, Zarathi could see that the human moved differently than any species she knew. There was a predatory grace to its movements, like a hunting animal preparing to strike. The pirate who had been approaching stopped uncertainly. Something in the human's posture had changed, though Zarathi couldn't identify exactly what. The human was still standing calmly, hands at its sides, but there was now an undeniable sense of danger radiating from it. "Sit down," the pirate ordered, raising his energy weapon. The human tilted its head slightly, studying the weapon with apparent interest. "That's a Mark 7 plasma rifle, Valderan military issue. Effective range about 50 meters. Rate of fire approximately 40 shots per minute. Nice weapon." The casual assessment seemed to unnerve the pirate. "How do you know about Valdoran weapons?" "We study things," the human replied. "It's another thing we're persistent about." Torvak had noticed the exchange and was moving toward them, his own weapon drawn. "I said sit down, alien." The human looked at the approaching captain, then at the other pirates positioned around the room. Its eyes moved systematically as if cataloging positions and equipment. When it spoke again, its voice carried a different tone. Still calm, but with an underlying hardness that made Zarathi's skin crawl. "You know," the human said conversationally, "I was hoping this could be resolved peacefully. I really don't like violence." "Then you'll do as you're told," Torvak growled. The human smiled again, but this time the expression was different. It was the smile of a predator that had decided to stop playing with its prey. "The thing is," the human continued, "I don't like bullies even more than I don't like violence." The mining station orbited a dead planet, its metal corridors humming with the constant vibration of extraction equipment. Commander Zarathi adjusted her biosuit as she walked through the central hub, her forearms moving with practiced efficiency as she reviewed the daily reports on her tablet. The Catherian had been running this operation for 3 standard cycles, and everything had been perfectly routine until today. The distress signal had come from Sector 7, deep in the asteroid belt where the heavy mining took place. 3 of her best workers had gone missing during their shift, and the automated system showed signs of interference. Worse yet, the security feeds had gone dark exactly 47 minutes ago. In her experience, when technology failed this completely, it usually meant one thing: pirates. Zarathi's people, the Catherians, were known throughout the galaxy for their methodical approach to problems. They were engineers, scientists, and administrators who preferred to solve conflicts through negotiation and superior technology. Their forearms made them excellent at multitasking, and their tall, slender frames housed brains capable of processing multiple data streams simultaneously. What they were not known for was physical combat. The elevator descended toward Sector 7 with painful slowness. Zarathi had sent her security team ahead, but they were equipped with standard energy weapons and riot gear designed more for crowd control than actual warfare. The mining station employed over 200 beings from 12 different species, but most were technical specialists, not fighters. As the doors opened onto Level 7, the first thing Zarathi noticed was the silence. The constant humming of machinery had stopped, replaced by an eerie quiet that made her skin crawl under her biosuit. Emergency lighting cast long shadows down the corridor, and she could see scorch marks on the walls where energy weapons had been fired. Her communication device crackled to life. "Commander, this is Security Chief Vector. We've found the missing workers. They're alive but unconscious. The pirates appear to have taken control of the main processing center." Zarathi moved carefully through the corridor, stepping over debris and damaged equipment. The pirates had been thorough in their takeover, disabling key systems and cutting off escape routes. She could hear voices ahead, speaking in the harsh tones of Valdoran mercenaries. The Valdorans were one of the few species in the galaxy that still celebrated physical violence, and they had a reputation for taking what they wanted through force. As she approached the processing center, Zarathi could see through the reinforced glass windows. 6 Valdoran pirates stood inside, their massive frames covered in crude armor plating. Each one was nearly twice her height and probably 4 times her weight. They had taken 12 station workers hostage, forcing them to kneel in the center of the room while they worked to crack the secure vault that contained the processed rare minerals. The scene was exactly what she had expected, except for one detail that made her pause. Among the hostages was a figure she didn't recognize. While the other workers wore the standard mining station uniforms, this individual was dressed in what appeared to be salvaged clothing. More importantly, This person was clearly not from any species she knew. The being was bipedal like herself, but shorter and more compact. Its skin appeared to be some shade of tan or brown, though it was difficult to tell in the emergency lighting. What struck her most was how calm it appeared. While the other hostages showed obvious signs of fear, trembling and keeping their heads down, this unknown being sat perfectly still, watching the pirates with what seemed like curious interest. Zarathy activated her communicator. "Chief Vectar, who is the unknown individual among the hostages?" The response came back immediately. "Commander, we found that being in a damaged escape pod 3 days ago. Claims to be from a species called human, from a planet called Earth. We were planning to transfer it to the diplomatic station, but the attack happened before we could arrange transport. A human." Zarathy had never heard of such a species, which was unusual, given her extensive knowledge of galactic civilizations. The being must be from one of the unexplored regions, possibly a first contact situation. This complicated matters significantly. If something happened to this human during a rescue attempt, it could create diplomatic problems with an unknown civilization. Through the window, she watched as the largest Valdoran pirate approached the human. The pirate was speaking, probably making threats or demands, but the human simply looked up at the massive creature without flinching. There was something unsettling about the human's complete lack of fear. Every other species in the galaxy showed appropriate submission when faced with Valdoran aggression. It was a survival instinct that had kept countless beings alive during encounters with the warrior race. The pirate leader seemed frustrated by the human's lack of response and grabbed it by the arm, hauling it to its feet. Zarathy expected to see the human collapse or beg for mercy. Instead, the human stood calmly, meeting the pirate's gaze with steady eyes. The Valdoran's grip could easily break the bones of most species, but the human showed no sign of pain. "Commander," came Chief Vectar's voice through the communicator. "We're in position. We count 6 hostiles, standard energy weapons, heavy armor. Recommend we wait for reinforcements from the main fleet." Zarathy considered the options. Her security team was competent but outnumbered and outgunned. The Valdorans had chosen their position well, with only one entrance and plenty of cover. A direct assault would likely result in casualties among both her security forces and the hostages. However, waiting for reinforcements could take hours, and there was no guarantee the pirates would keep the hostages alive that long. As she watched, the pirate leader released the human and moved toward the vault controls. The human remained standing where it had been placed, still showing that same unsettling calm. The other hostages had shifted away from it slightly, as if sensing something different about the newcomer. Zarathy made her decision. She would attempt to negotiate with the pirates, offering them safe passage in exchange for the hostages. It wasn't ideal, but it was the most logical approach given the circumstances. As she prepared to make contact with the pirates, she found herself wondering about the mysterious human and why it seemed so completely unafraid of creatures that terrified veteran spacers. 2 days after the incident with the pirates, Zarathy found herself in an impossible position. Her preliminary report to Galactic Command had caused what could only be described as panic among the higher-ranking officials. 3 different admirals had contacted her personally, each demanding more details about human combat capabilities. The diplomatic corps was mobilizing their first contact specialists, while the military assessment division was classifying humanity as a potential Category 5 threat. Marcus seemed unaware of the chaos his existence was causing throughout galactic government. He had spent the past 2 days helping repair the damage caused by the pirate attack, working alongside her engineering teams with quiet efficiency. The other station personnel had initially been wary of him, but his calm demeanor and willingness to help with even the most mundane tasks had quickly won them over. What troubled Zarathy most was how normal Marcus seemed. He shared meals with the crew, told stories about Earth during break periods, and showed genuine interest in learning about other species and their cultures. It was almost impossible to reconcile this friendly, curious individual with the lethal efficiency he had displayed against the pirates. Her contemplation was interrupted by an urgent communication from her security chief. "Commander, we have a situation developing in Docking Bay 3. You need to see this." Zarathy made her way quickly to the observation deck overlooking the docking bay where Chief Vectar was waiting with a grim expression. "What's the problem?" she asked. "Look," he said, pointing toward the main viewing port. Outside, a massive warship was approaching the station. Zarathi recognized the design immediately, and her blood ran cold. It was a hegemony battlecruiser, one of the most powerful military vessels in the galaxy. The hegemony was a loose alliance of warrior species that considered themselves the galaxy's ultimate military force. They were led by the Krextai, a species that made the Valdorans look peaceful by comparison. "They're requesting permission to dock," Chief Vectar continued. "They claim they're here to investigate reports of a new military threat." Zarathi closed her eyes, understanding immediately what had happened. Word of the humans' combat capabilities had reached the hegemony, and they were coming to assess whether humanity posed a threat to their dominance. This was exactly the kind of confrontation she had hoped to avoid. "How long until they dock?" she asked. 15 minutes. "Commander, their ship is carrying a full military assessment team. If they determine that humans are a threat." Zarathi didn't need him to finish the sentence. The hegemony's standard response to potential threats was preemptive elimination. They had destroyed entire civilizations based on nothing more than the possibility that those civilizations might eventually challenge their power. She activated her communicator. "Marcus, please report to my office immediately." When Marcus arrived, Zarathi explained the situation as quickly as possible. To her surprise, he took the news with the same calm acceptance he had shown throughout their previous conversations. "So they're coming to decide whether humanity should be allowed to exist," he said simply. "Essentially, yes. Marcus, I need you to understand something. The hegemony doesn't negotiate, they don't compromise. If they decide humanity is a threat, they will attempt to locate Earth and destroy it before your people can develop stronger defenses." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "How do these assessments usually work?" "Combat trials. They'll want to test your abilities directly, probably in some kind of formal challenge. If you perform too well, they'll classify humanity as a threat. If you perform poorly, they'll consider you harmless and leave you alone. And if I refuse to participate, they'll consider that evidence of deception and proceed with the threat classification." Marcus was quiet for a moment, considering his options. "Commander, I need you to understand something about humans. We don't respond well to threats, especially threats against our families and homes." "What do you mean?" "I mean that if these hegemony representatives try to intimidate me into demonstrating human weakness, they're going to get exactly the opposite result." Zarathi felt a surge of alarm. "Marcus, you have to be careful here. This isn't about personal pride. The survival of your entire species could depend on how you handle this situation." "I understand that," Marcus replied calmly, "which is exactly why I can't afford to show weakness. If I let them think humanity can be easily intimidated or controlled, that won't protect my people. It will just make us targets for future exploitation." Before Zarathi could respond, her communicator activated. "Commander, the hegemony delegation is requesting an immediate meeting with you and the human representative." Marcus stood up, straightening his borrowed uniform. "I guess it's time to meet the neighbors." The delegation consisted of 5 representatives from different hegemony species, led by a Krextai commander whose mere presence seemed to fill the conference room with barely contained violence. Commander Thraktor stood nearly 3 meters tall, his scaled hide bearing the ritual scars that marked him as a veteran of dozens of campaigns. His 3 arms each ended in claws capable of rending metal, and his eyes held the cold intelligence of a predator evaluating prey. "I am Commander Thraktor of the Hegemony Military Assessment Division," he announced in a voice like grinding stone. "I am here to evaluate the combat capabilities of the species known as human." Marcus stood to face the Krextai commander, and Zarathi was struck again by the sheer size difference. Thraktor could have torn Marcus apart with his bare claws, yet the human showed no sign of intimidation. "I'm Marcus Chen," he said simply. "I represent humanity." Thraktor studied Marcus with obvious contempt. "You are small, weak. I have read the reports of your encounter with Valdoran pirates, but I find them difficult to believe. Valdorans are children compared to true warriors." "Is that so?" Marcus replied, his tone remaining conversational. "I propose a simple test," Thraktor continued, his claws clicking against the metal table. Single combat. You against one of my warriors. If you can defeat a true hegemony fighter, we will acknowledge that your species has potential. If you cannot, we will classify you as we see fit. Marcus glanced at Zarathi, who was trying desperately to think of a way to prevent what was about to happen. She could see the trap clearly. If Marcus lost, the hegemony would dismiss humanity as weak and potentially enslave them. If he won convincingly, they would see humanity as a threat and move to eliminate them. What kind of combat? Marcus asked. Hand to hand, no weapons. To unconsciousness or surrender. Thractor's mandibles clicked in what passed for a smile among his species. I will provide the opponent myself. One of the other delegation members, a massive Vorthak warrior covered in chitinous armor plating, stepped forward. The creature stood nearly as tall as Thractor, but was built like a living tank, with 4 arms ending in bone spikes and a carapace that could deflect energy weapons. Marcus looked at the Vorthak with the same analytical expression he had worn when studying the Valderan weapons. Interesting biology. The armor plating looks natural, not artificial enhancement. Ketmore has killed over 100 opponents in formal combat. Thractor said proudly. He has never been defeated. There's a first time for everything, Marcus replied mildly. The casual confidence in his voice made Thractor's eyes narrow dangerously. You display arrogance for such a small creature. I begin to think your species may indeed be a problem. Zarathi realized with growing horror that Marcus was deliberately provoking the hegemony commander. Everything about his demeanor suggested that he had no intention of trying to appear weak or harmless. When do you want to have this fight? Marcus asked. Now. The cargo bay will provide adequate space. As they moved toward the cargo bay, Zarathi tried one last time to reason with Marcus. You don't have to do this. We could try to negotiate, find another way to demonstrate human intentions. Marcus paused and looked at her with something approaching sadness. Commander, I appreciate everything you've tried to do, but you need to understand something about humans. We've been dealing with bullies for our entire history. Sometimes the only language they understand is strength. But if you hurt their warrior too badly, then they'll know that attacking humanity would be very expensive, Marcus finished. Sometimes that's the only deterrent that works. The cargo bay had been cleared of equipment, providing an open space roughly 50 meters square. The hegemony delegation took positions along one wall, while Zarathi and her staff stood opposite them. Marcus walked to the center of the bay, where Ketmore was already waiting. Up close, the size difference was even more intimidating. The Vorthak warrior was easily 3 times Marcus's mass, with natural weapons that could tear through most materials. His forearms moved independently, allowing him to attack from multiple angles simultaneously. Last chance to surrender, little creature. Ketmore rumbled in accented galactic standard. Marcus rolled his shoulders, loosening up his muscles. I appreciate the offer, but I think I'll pass. Thractor raised one clawed hand. Begin! Ketmore immediately charged forward, using his superior reach to launch a devastating 4-armed assault. Most beings would have been overwhelmed instantly by the sheer volume of attacks coming from different directions. Marcus wasn't most beings, he moved with the same. The following morning, Zarathi was awakened by her emergency communicator. The message was brief but alarming. Commander, urgent situation developing. Multiple unknown ships approaching the station. She arrived at the command center to find her staff in a state of controlled panic. The tactical display showed 7 ships of unfamiliar design approaching from different vectors. Their energy signatures unlike anything in the galactic databases. Commander, her sensor operator reported, the ships appeared simultaneously at the edge of our sensor range approximately 10 minutes ago. They're maintaining formation and approaching at standard diplomatic speeds. Zarathi studied the display with growing unease. The ships were sleek and efficient-looking, clearly built for speed and maneuverability rather than raw firepower. But there was something about their design that suggested they were far more dangerous than they appeared. Any response to our standard hails? She asked. Yes, Commander. They're requesting permission to dock and speak with the human representative. They identify themselves as the Earth Colonial Fleet. Zarathi felt her blood turn to ice. Marcus had mentioned that his ship was part of humanity's first interstellar exploration program, but he had given the impression that humans were still limited to slow, single-ship missions. The presence of 7 ships suggested that human space capabilities were far more advanced than he had led her to believe. "Where is Marcus?" she asked. "In Engineering Bay 7, helping with the plasma conduit repairs. Get him up here immediately." While they waited for Marcus to arrive, Zarathi tried to assess the situation. The timing couldn't be a coincidence. Somehow the human fleet had learned of Marcus's location and come to retrieve him. But how had they found him so quickly? And how had they managed to coordinate the arrival of multiple ships across interstellar distances? Marcus arrived within minutes, still wearing his engineering coveralls and carrying a plasma torch. When he saw the tactical display, his expression shifted to one of mild surprise. "Oh," he said simply, "they found me." "Marcus," Zarathi said carefully, "you told me that human space travel was limited and slow. It is for exploration missions. The Endeavor was designed for long-range scientific surveys, so it prioritized sensor arrays and laboratory space over speed." Marcus studied the ship configurations on the display. "These are military vessels. They're built for rapid response and force projection." "Military vessels," Zarathi repeated faintly. "Search and rescue, most likely. When the Endeavor failed to report in, Earth probably dispatched a recovery fleet to look for survivors." The casual way Marcus discussed humanity's ability to deploy military fleets across interstellar space made Zarathi's earlier concerns seem almost quaint. She had been worried about the implications of a single human's combat abilities. The presence of 7 warships suggested that humanity's threat potential was far greater than anyone had imagined. "Commander," her communications officer interrupted. "We're receiving a transmission from the lead human vessel." "Put it through." The main display shifted to show the bridge of one of the human ships. Zarathi found herself looking at another human, this one clearly military based on the crisp uniform and formal bearing. The individual appeared to be female, with short dark hair and eyes that held the same alert intelligence she had noticed in Marcus. "This is Captain Sarah Chen of the ECS Retribution. I understand you have one of our people aboard your station." Zarathi noticed immediately that the human shared Marcus's surname. "Captain Chen, I am Commander Zarathi. We do indeed have Marcus Chen in our care. Are you related?" The human captain's expression softened slightly. "He's my brother." "Is he unharmed?" "He's fine. In fact, he's been quite helpful during his stay here." Marcus stepped into view of the camera. "Hi, Sarah. Sorry about the delay getting home." The relief on Captain Chen's face was obvious. "Marcus, you scared the hell out of us. When the Endeavor didn't report in, we thought—" She paused, collecting herself. "Are you ready for extraction?" "Actually," Marcus said, "the situation here is a bit complicated. We've made first contact with galactic civilization, and there are some diplomatic considerations that need to be addressed." Captain Chen's expression immediately became more formal. "Explain." Marcus quickly summarized the events of the past few days, including the pirate incident and the confrontation with the hegemony delegation. As he spoke, Zarathi watched Captain Chen's face carefully, noting how the human officer processed information about galactic politics and military capabilities. "So," Captain Chen said when Marcus finished, "we're dealing with multiple hostile factions, uncertain political alliances, and at least one group that might attempt preemptive strikes against Earth." "That's a fair assessment," Marcus replied. Captain Chen was quiet for a moment, and Zarathi could almost see her mind working through the tactical implications. "Marcus, I need you to arrange a meeting with the local authorities and this hegemony delegation. We need to establish clear parameters for future human-galactic relations." "Sarah," Marcus said carefully, "these people have been trying to help. Don't come in here making demands." "I'm not making demands. I'm establishing a negotiating position." Captain Chen's tone was professionally calm, but Zarathi could hear the underlying steel. "Marcus, Earth spent 6 months preparing for the possibility that your mission had made contact with hostile aliens. We're not unprepared for this situation." The implications of that statement sent chills down Zarathi's spine. Humanity had been planning for hostile first contact scenarios for months, which suggested they had contingency plans for various levels of conflict. "Commander Zarathi," Captain Chen continued, "I want to thank you for taking care of my brother and for facilitating peaceful contact. However, I think it would be beneficial for all parties if we could establish more formal diplomatic relations. Of course, Zarathi replied, though she wasn't sure she had much choice in the matter. I'll arrange for the hegemony delegation to participate in any discussions. Excellent. We'll dock in 2 hours. I'll be bringing a diplomatic team and a small security detail. After the transmission ended, Zarathi turned to Marcus with a mixture of admiration and concern. Your sister seems very capable, Marcus smiled slightly. Sarah was a Marine Corps officer before she joined the colonial fleet. She's used to dealing with hostile situations. How hostile? Zarathi asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. Well, let's just say that if the hegemony decides to threaten Earth, they're going to discover that humans have been preparing for interstellar warfare a lot longer than they've been preparing for interstellar diplomacy. 2 hours later, Zarathi found herself in the unprecedented position of hosting a 3-way diplomatic meeting between species that had never encountered each other before. The main conference room had been reconfigured to accommodate the different physiological needs of all parties, with environmental controls adjusted for optimal comfort. Captain Chen arrived with a team of 5 humans, all clearly military personnel despite their diplomatic credentials. Zarathi noticed immediately that they moved with the same controlled grace that Marcus had displayed, suggesting that his combat abilities were indeed typical for his species. Commander Thraktor and his delegation occupied one side of the conference table, their predatory presence making the air feel heavy with potential violence. The humans sat opposite them, appearing relaxed and professional despite the obvious threat posed by the hegemony representatives. Commander Thraktor, Captain Chen began, I understand you've been evaluating humanity's military capabilities. Indeed, the Krextai replied, his mandibles clicking with interest. Your brother proved quite instructive. I'm glad he was able to provide useful information. However, I think there may be some misconceptions about human intentions that we should address. Thraktor leaned forward, his claws scraping against the table surface. Speak plainly, human. Your species possesses significant combat abilities. The question is whether you intend to use them aggressively. Captain Chen met his gaze directly, showing no sign of intimidation. Commander, humanity has been dealing with the question of military power versus peaceful coexistence for centuries. We've learned that true security comes not from the ability to destroy our enemies, but from the wisdom to turn potential enemies into allies. Pretty words, Thraktor rumbled. But what of action? What would humanity do if faced with a species that sought to enslave or eliminate you? We would defend ourselves with every resource at our disposal, Captain Chen replied without hesitation. And we would not stop until the threat was eliminated. And if faced with a species that offered partnership and mutual respect? Captain Chen smiled, and for the first time Zarathi saw warmth in the human officer's expression. Then we would probably become the most loyal allies you could imagine. Humans have a saying, a friend to all is a friend to none. But when we do make friends, we tend to keep them. Thraktor considered this for a long moment. Your species is indeed strange. Most warrior races we encounter are either wholly aggressive or wholly passive. You appear to be both simultaneously. We prefer to think of it as being appropriately responsive to circumstances. Captain Chen replied diplomatically. The Krextai commander's mandibles clicked in what Zarathi was learning. 6 months after first contact, Zarathi stood in the observation deck of the newly constructed Kepler Station Diplomatic Center, watching as the 3rd human trade convoy of the month arrived at the expanded docking facilities. The transformation had been remarkable to witness. What had started as a simple mining operation had evolved into one of the galaxy's most important diplomatic and commercial hubs. Representatives from dozens of species now maintained permanent offices on the station, all eager to establish relationships with the newcomers from Earth. The humans had proven to be exactly what Captain Chen had promised. Fiercely loyal allies and surprisingly generous trading partners. Their technology, while different from galactic standard, had proven highly effective in several key areas. Human medical techniques had revolutionized treatment for a dozen previously incurable conditions. Their engineering approaches had improved, efficiency in everything from space travel to manufacturing, but it was their military capabilities that had truly changed the galactic political landscape. The hegemony's initial assessment had proven remarkably accurate. Humanity was indeed a warrior species, but one that had learned to channel its aggressive instincts constructively. When the Corvani Empire had attempted to annex a peaceful mining colony in the Outer Rim, it was human ships that had arrived first to defend the civilians. When Valdoran pirates had begun raiding shipping lanes near Earth space, human patrols had eliminated the threat so efficiently that piracy in the entire sector had virtually disappeared. Most significantly, when the Zephyrian Collective had launched what they believed would be a quick conquest of the mineral-rich Tau Ceti system, they had encountered the full might of the Earth colonial fleet. Zarathi had watched the battle reports with fascination and growing respect. The humans hadn't simply defeated the Zephyrian fleet. They had done so while minimizing casualties on both sides, then immediately offered medical assistance and diplomatic negotiations to their former enemies. Within weeks, the Zephyrian Collective had applied for membership in the newly formed Human Galactic Cooperation Treaty. "Commander, you have a visitor," her aide announced through the communicator. Zarathi turned to see Marcus Chen entering the observation deck. Though he looked very different from the salvage-wearing refugee she had first encountered, he now wore the formal uniform of the Earth Diplomatic Corps, with insignia marking him as a special ambassador for First Contact Affairs. "Marcus," she said warmly, "I wasn't expecting you back for another week." "The negotiations with the Altarian Republic concluded earlier than expected," he replied, joining her at the observation window. "Turns out they were very interested in human agricultural techniques once they realized we could help them feed their growing population." "Another successful mission?" "Then," Marcus nodded, but his expression was thoughtful. "Zarathi, can I ask you something? When you first met me, did you ever imagine things would develop like this?" Zarathi considered the question as she watched a human freighter docking with practiced precision. "Honestly, I thought you were going to cause a galactic war." Marcus laughed, the same warm sound she remembered from their early conversations. "I can see how you might have reached that conclusion. We humans do have a talent for dramatic first impressions." "It wasn't just the fighting," Zarathi said. "It was the way you fought. The complete lack of fear, the precision, the restraint even in the midst of violence. It suggested a species that had mastered warfare to a degree that most civilizations never achieve. And that terrified you." "Yes, it did. But what I didn't understand then was that mastering warfare and choosing peace aren't contradictory. Your people had to become capable of incredible violence precisely so you could choose not to use it." Marcus was quiet for a moment, watching as another ship approached the station. This one bore the markings of the Hegemony fleet, though it was flying civilian transponder codes. "You know," he said eventually, "when I was fighting those pirates, I wasn't thinking about representing humanity or making first contact with galactic civilization. I was just thinking about protecting people who couldn't protect themselves." "That's exactly what I mean," Zarathi replied. "Most species, when they develop the ability to project force, immediately start thinking about how to use it for their own benefit. Humans seem to instinctively think about how to use it to protect others. We learned the hard way that nobody is truly safe unless everybody is safe," Marcus said. "It took us thousands of years and a few near extinctions to figure that out. But once we did, it changed everything." They stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching the constant flow of traffic around the station. Ships from dozens of worlds brought trade goods, diplomatic missions, and cultural exchanges. The diversity was remarkable, but what struck Zarathi most was how peaceful it all seemed. "Marcus," she said finally, "I want to thank you." "For what?" "For being exactly what the galaxy needed, even though none of us knew we needed it." Before the arrival of humanity, galactic civilization had been dominated by a complex web of competing interests, military threats, and political maneuvering. Peace existed mainly as the absence of active warfare, maintained through a delicate balance of mutually assured destruction. The humans had changed that dynamic completely. Their willingness to fight for others rather than themselves had created something unprecedented, a truly defensive military alliance. Species that had been enemies for centuries were now working together under human protection, discovering that cooperation was more profitable than conflict. "You know," Marcus said, "Sarah told me something interesting last week. Apparently, military recruitment on Earth has dropped by 60% since we made contact with galactic civilization." "Really? Why?" Because most of the people who joined the military did so to protect Earth and humanity. Now that we're part of a larger community, with allies and friends throughout the galaxy, Earth feels safer than it has in centuries. People are choosing careers in diplomacy, trade, and exploration instead of warfare. Zarathi found this revelation fascinating. So success in defending others has led to less need for defense at home. Exactly. It's the same principle that works on Earth applied to galactic scale. The stronger our community becomes, the safer everyone in it feels. As if summoned by their conversation, Zarathi's communicator activated with an incoming priority message. She recognized the sender immediately. Admiral Korthak of the Hegemony Supreme Command. Commander Zarathi, this is Admiral Korthak. I'm transmitting from the ship you see approaching your station. I have an urgent matter to discuss with Ambassador Chen. Marcus activated his own communicator. This is Ambassador Chen, Admiral. How can I help you? Ambassador, the Hegemony Council has reached a decision regarding humanity's role in galactic affairs. We would like to formally request Earth's assistance in establishing a new galactic security framework. Zarathi was stunned. The Hegemony asking for help was unprecedented in galactic history. They had been the dominant military force for over 1,000 years, answering to no one and consulting with no one. What kind of assistance? Marcus asked calmly. We want to transition from a dominance-based security model to a cooperation-based one, similar to what humanity has established. Our analysts believe this approach will be more effective at preventing large-scale conflicts while requiring fewer resources to maintain. Marcus glanced at Zarathi, who could see he was trying not to smile. Admiral, I'd be happy to discuss this with you. Would you like to come aboard for a formal meeting? Yes, Ambassador, and thank you. After the communication ended, Marcus turned to Zarathi with undisguised amusement. 6 months ago, they were ready to declare us a threat to galactic peace. 6 months ago, they were probably right, Zarathi replied. Humanity is a threat to the old way of doing things. You've proven that there's a better way to achieve security and prosperity. And now? Zarathi looked out at the bustling station, at the ships from dozens of worlds working together in harmony, at the symbol of hope that humanity had become for species throughout the galaxy. Now, she said, I think the galaxy is finally growing up. As they prepared to receive the Hegemony delegation, Zarathi reflected on how much had changed since that first terrifying encounter, with a human fighting barehanded against impossible odds. She had expected humanity to bring war to the galaxy. Instead, they had brought something far more revolutionary, the possibility of genuine peace. Alien woman who had once frozen in terror at the sight of human combat. Capabilities now felt nothing but gratitude for the day Marcus Chen had decided to fight for people he had never met, in a place he had never been, simply because it was the right thing to do. Sometimes, Zarathi thought, the most dangerous thing a warrior can bring to a fight is the wisdom to know when not to fight at all.